I actually took steps before the November 2022 election to kind of do some group and community outreach with how elections work, what equipment we use, how do we do it. And there was a very, very low turnout. I'm going to try to do it again in November 24. I mean, I went on the radio and talked about it. I did a TV interview. It was in the newspaper. I put it on Facebook. That's the most frustrating thing about today's times is there's so many ways to inform people, but nobody's paying attention.
The full and free exercise of our sacred right and duty to vote is more important in the long run than the personal hopes or ambitions of any candidate for any office in the land.
You're listening to High Turnout, Wide Margins, an insider's look at election administration hosted by Brianna Lennon and Eric Fay.
This is Eric Fay, along with my co-host,
Brianna Lennon.
And today we're at the Miller County, Missouri Courthouse with the county clerk, Clinton Jenkins. I think we decided to do this because Clinton and I were testifying in the state capitol a couple weeks ago, on a hand counting bill.
Next in opposition.
And he told me a story about him being the third generation of county clerks in Miller County. So we thought that's too good to pass up.
It's Clinton Jenkins, Miller County Clerk, and all the city people just took all my good points. So I'm back and clean up. As a third generation county clerk, I am not going to stake my family's name and reputation on using equipment or resources I do not trust.
So for our last episode of season 2, we are talking to Clinton Jenkins in Miller County, Missouri. And he is a third-class county clerk. And in Missouri, our counties are divided by classification based on the assessed valuation of the county. So basically, if the county has more resources, more assessed valuation when it comes to property, you can be a third class, a second class, or first class county. Boone County, for example, is a first class county. That means that my office is not in charge of the budget for the county because we have a county auditor. But in a third class county, there is no county auditor. So the county clerk doesn't just run elections and payroll and liquor licenses like they do in my office. They're also the budget officer. So they're doing a lot more work on top of what a first class or second class county would do. And Clinton talks a little bit about that, but he also talks, I think, most importantly, and why we wanted to talk to him, about how he's really kind of a legacy county clerk, a third generation clerk, and we just thought that was a really important note to end on.
Yeah, and for me, in many ways, Clinton is kind of the prototypical local election official in the United States, in that he's from a relatively small jurisdiction. It's a rural jurisdiction. He has a lot of other duties in addition to elections, which is common throughout most of the United States. But he's also atypical in that he's, like Brianna said, a third-generation clerk, which I think might have been more common in the past, but now with the seemingly increasing turnover in election officials, that's increasingly uncommon. So kind of to wrap up our second season, we wanted to bring it back to the origins of this podcast, and that was, for local election officials, by local election officials, about local election officials. And we thought this was just such a fun way to end, kind of brought the whole thing full circle in my mind. So it seemed like a good way to end the season. So Clinton, thank you for being here on the podcast. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, I alluded to it, but how you came into this, and maybe a little bit about Miller County.
Yeah, so about Miller County, we're fairly rural. We have a little sliver of Lake of the Ozarks that's really good for generating tax revenue, but it's two different worlds here. In the western part of the county is the lake, very more progressive, very financially sound, but you move over into the eastern, northern, and southern parts of the county, it's very rural, very very conservative. It's where I grew up. It's home. So it's just a great place to live. So you've got options. Like if you want to go into town, you can go into town, but you don't have to. But people here are great. I mean, you can talk to anybody. Everybody's laid back, has a good sense of humor. But how I got into office was my grandfather and my dad were both county clerks for several years, and I always kind of wanted to because I grew up in the original, or not the original, but the old Miller County courthouse, and it just always felt like something I was going to end up doing, and here I am.
Before we had started recording, how the rest of your family felt about you continuing on the tradition, I guess. Was that, so has it been like a long-standing tradition, like there's always someone in your family that is going to be the clerk, or?
No. Well, the clerk's office has been around since, I think, 1948, and I did the math on it, and my family's been in this office for 65% of the time that this office has existed. But public service has always been a big thing in my family. It kind of started with my grandpa. During the Great Depression, he grew up in the northern part of the county and had a farm, and just they weren't making where they needed to be. So him and two of his brothers joined the Navy, and this is at the end of the Depression, and we're stationed at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, and we're there on December 7th, 1941. So they went all the way through World War II, and then when Grandpa came home, shortly after, and within a few years, ran for state rep and won and became state rep. And I'm not sure, when we were up at the Capitol, I was actually looking for the rosters, but they've moved them into the library. So after that, he became county commissioner for a while. And after that, went to work as the chief deputy clerk in the county clerk's office. The county clerk passed away around 1970. Grandpa was appointed and then was county clerk for another 12 years. And then there was a gap of 4 years, and then Dad came in for 28 years, and now I just started my third term, so this is the 9th year. But I mean, even my dad worked for the state for like 12 years before he became county clerk, so there's a lot of public service there. And I served 8 years in the military before I went to college and graduated, and then did about 3 years with the state, and then came here. But it's kind of funny because my dad asked me, do you want to run for county clerk? Because he always knew it was like something in the back of my head. And I said, yeah, kind of. And then he convinced to 6 weeks of negotiations trying to talk me out of it, because he said the job that he did now, I mean, that would have been 2014, 2013, 2014 when we were having that conversation, that the job was so much different than when he started in 1987. So, and I mean, it's changed a lot. I mean, since I've been here, and this is my 9th year.
So I think that's a good segue into the next question. I mean, one reason we like to interview local election officials on this podcast is to try to give people an idea of what it's really like for most local election officials. So, Clinton, I think you are pretty typical of the vast majority of election officials in the United States, where you not only do you preside, let's call it preside, over a relatively rural jurisdiction, relatively small jurisdiction in terms of population, but you also have a host of other duties. So could you describe for people a little bit like what your job entails? What's a normal day or week look like for you?
Depends on the year. So the frustrating thing about being a Class 3 county clerk in Missouri is you take office January 1st. By the last day of January, you have a budget that's due. And our budget's 185 pages, and that's not including table of contents and all the supplemental stuff. So you've got a very short window to figure that out, and then you move into the financial statement, which is thousands and thousands of lines on an Excel spreadsheet. During all that, you're trying to figure out how to put on a municipal election, and in the past, you're doing a presidential preference every 4 years and a municipal election at the same time. Then you have railroad and utility disbursements that have to go out to the schools that's going on at the same time. You have assessed valuations that you calculate that comes from the recorder or from the assessor's office. You have a DESI report that takes about a week to do to break out all the information to the schools. You have tax levies in the summertime where we're the hub. All that goes through our office for every school district, village, city, fire department, library district, everybody. We have to set our own tax levy. We have to do the railroad and utility calculations to send the billing out to everybody. We have we do human resources. We have payroll. We have accounts payable. We do all of our health insurance. Sometimes we sweep the hallway during tax season because farmers come in with manure on their boots. It's everything. That's one of the things I love about this job, though, is driving down here, the 15-minute drive it takes me to get to the courthouse. Sometimes I just like try to make an internal bet with myself of what's going to happen today, and I'm never right.
What was it like growing up in a family of clerks? Because we all have kids, and most of us are not even second generation. And I wonder, like, you know, my kids don't see me a lot during election season and things like that, what they're going to think of the office and my job and me and all of that. What was it like growing up with so many clerks in your family?
Well, to me, it's natural that everybody knows you and who your dad is. I look exactly like my dad. You guys both came in, I think, after he left office, but we're the same height, I'm not as robust as dad is. But I mean, that's how I can judge how old somebody is by, hey, I worked for your grandpa, or I knew your grandpa, or those people are becoming more rare because, I mean, if my grandpa was still alive, he'd be like 103. But, you know, everybody knows my dad for the most part. And then I'm getting to the point to where everybody knows me. And then my kids see that, and it's like, oh, you know everybody, Dad. Well, I know a lot of people, and they're getting to the age to where they can get out of the house and kind of get in trouble. So it's kind of nice to know everybody because they can say, hey, I saw your kid doing this or that. So, yeah, it was just part of life. I mean, I don't know what it's like not to be part of a family that is in local politics. So maybe I could ask, what's that like to be able to go to the grocery store and people haven't known you your entire life?
Did you get, and I kind of already know the answer to this because you talked about it once, but did you get recruited to help out with elections when you were growing up?
Yes. If it wasn't nepotism, I never got paid, so let's get that out there. But if I were to get back paid, I think I've been working elections since I was in the 4th grade, helping bring in ballots, the old duffel bags of ballots, and helping people come in and stuff, and then running election results from the courthouse down to my grandma's house, and just keeping up. And it's just been part of life. I mean, I miss the old days when people used to actually show up at the courthouse and kind of camp out and have that community feel to get results. But now with the internet and Facebook, it's just out there. But I mean, every once in a while August primary elections, we'll have a group come out. I've tried to bring that back a little bit, but it's never going to be like it was. We got the internet in Miller County finally, so that wiped that out.
Yeah, I couldn't believe when you told me that not only was your grandpa and dad county clerk, but you lived right across from the courthouse. So, I mean, your dad, the work probably never left, and you told these great stories how you, on election night when you were helping out, you'd run stuff back and forth from the house. And I think that might be more typical than many people think still, because they think of, big cities. But like I said before, most election officials are not in big cities. They're in places like this.
Well, I think a big part of what people don't understand is when you're a county clerk in a lot of these county level offices, you're not a politician by any means. You're just a public servant, and I think a lot of people don't understand the amount of work that goes into a county clerk's office, whether it be class 1, 2, or 3. I mean, you guys have your own responsibilities. It's just at a macro level instead of the more micro that I deal with. And I mean, I'm definitely not the smallest county in Missouri. There's smaller, but it just depends on where you're at. But always somebody's carrying the burden.
Hello, I'm Eric Fay, Director of Elections in St. Louis County, Missouri, and you're listening to High Turnout, Wide Margins, a podcast where we explore local election administration.
Starting your third term and knowing, you were here for the 2016 election and 2020 election, and we're looking at 2024, and obviously, like, you've been up to the legislature. What are you most concerned about going into the election cycle next year?
I'm concerned that it's going to be 2020 more amplified. There's going to be more conspiracies. There's going to be more everything. If you've watched the news this week with what's going on with former President Trump, I think that's going to be amplified. I actually took steps before the November 2022 election to kind of do some group and community outreach with how elections work, what equipment we use, how do we do it. And there was a very, very low turnout. I did one in this room, did one in Eldon, and I did one at the Lake of the Ozarks with the Camden County clerk. We had 3 people show up. So, it was pulling back the curtain, showing them who Oz is, but nobody was interested enough to do it. I'm going to try to do it again in November 24. I went on the radio and talked about it. I did a TV interview. It was in the newspaper. I put it on Facebook. That's the most frustrating thing about today's times is there's so many ways to inform people, but nobody's paying attention.
Just before you started this interview, your verification board was here, verifying everything from the most recent April election. So in Missouri, municipal elections happen in April. So you had a bipartisan team here in your office, and they were manually hand counting ballots to verify that what was tabulated on election night was correct. How'd that go?
You saw it. So we had to do 28 ballots for a manual recount because it's 5% of your precincts. One precinct in Miller County satisfies that. We had to recount those 3 times. I couldn't even imagine trying to do thousands of ballots that way.
One great point you made, Clinton, when we were in the state capitol a couple weeks ago, you testified in front of the Senate Elections Committee, and you made the point that all the ballots are counted in bipartisan teams, and all the election judges in Missouri, they're all bipartisan, and Miller County is a conservative Republican county. So if you're going to hand count all the ballots, you might be able to find enough Republicans, but you definitely need more judges. Where would you find more Democrats? So that's one facet of it that many people don't think about.
Luckily, we had the statute that changed the rules to where we could just pull in people from other counties without having to get the other county clerk's permission. Even now I'm using judges from Camden County and Cole County just to supplement what I have on the Democrat side. I've got Republicans in a holding pattern that have requested to work 4 years ago, and I still can't get them in. But Democrats, if you volunteer, if I call you and you say you will work, I will call you for every election until your phone turns off.
There's things that are happening at the national level. We've been sort of hearing about them, and there's a magnifying glass now on everything that we're doing. Have you had any you only had 3 people come to, the information sessions. What I'm seeing, when I try to do that, same thing happens. Very few people show up. And then I find out, way later that there are these other little groups of people that are having conversations, and they're online or they're on Facebook or wherever they are, and they never come and actually directly ask anything. Are you finding that to be the case here too?
Yeah, I get the calls, and I've actually had conspiracy theorists come down here, walked them through the entire process, showed them the equipment, showed them our voter database. Didn't let them touch anything, obviously, but showed them. And I think I've had at least two of those people come down, and when they leave, there's no more question. It's, yes, this is secure. Holy cow, I can't believe you guys have to do this for every election. Yeah, we do. There's no difference. So, it's very frustrating. And, I've told people openly, if you want to see how it runs, come down here. We'll show you. We have nothing to hide. When you're in a small community like this, there's no way to hide anything. You shop in the same grocery stores with everybody. Kids go to the same schools. Why would I lie and try to hide stuff? I want to live here my whole life. Why why would I tarnish anything?
Are you finding interest or support or anything from your other elected colleagues that are here? Because, I mean, it's the same in Boone County. We're all in the same building, but I don't always get the sense that they have a full understanding of what it is that we're dealing with right now. And I look at places like Shasta County and these other places where their commission is then getting overly involved in the elections process when they hadn't been before. Is that a concern?
No, everybody's pretty much hands off. Nobody wants to get involved. It's just too much.
We've talked a lot about the lead up to 2024, but just in general, what's your biggest concern? And it doesn't even have to be election related. What's the biggest concern you have in this job? What's the biggest challenge you have in this job that you would like people to know about?
Work and private balances, trying to do this and still find time for your kids. I mean, my son was 6 months old when I filed to run, and he's 9 now. There's stuff I missed. It's not fun. There's family stuff that you miss. There's just part of your life just kind of goes on hold when you do this job, because there's not missing elections. There's not missing deadlines. You just do it. That's hard. But I mean, I guess as far as like if I was to categorize anything in election time, I mean, I know our equipment's solid. Everybody in Missouri uses the right stuff. I'm not sure if I haven't researched it enough to know what's wrong and what's right outside of Missouri. And that's the only, I always preface anything I always say about elections is I only know about Missouri. I don't know how other states do anything. But from what I understand, we're pretty, tip of the spear on common sense election laws. But, you could always have a catastrophic breakdown with your equipment. You could always have, judges that can't make it. You could always have a natural disaster. I mean, I stopped sleeping about 3 days before an election, just trying to figure out what's going to go wrong. And again, you never get it right. There's always something, a curveball that you don't see.
I really want to ask more about being like third generation, and so there's a shortage of clerks everywhere. I mean, that's the thing. And that's the thing that I find like most remarkable about your situation is there's places that are literally like vacant positions, and not necessarily in Missouri, but you can't find anybody to run. And I think it's pretty rare to have somebody that's just like, yep, I come in and I have basically this whole wealth of experience and people that I can talk to about it and everything, and you still wanted to do it after you saw what it was. So what is it that pushed you into it?
Stubborn? I don't know. I never really wanted to be like in the public for anything, because I'm a fairly shy person. I don't do well in groups. Like if you see me at our conference every year, like I'm usually like off away, because I don't like this. 3 people is fine. You throw in a 4th person, don't know how to handle it. So like one-on-one, I'm fine. Public speaking, I've learned how to do, but it was just a part of life growing up. I don't know anything else.
Got any really great stories that you can share publicly about growing up in this business? Like your dad or grandpa have any great stories from being county clerk?
2. One's kind of sentimental. There's 2 ladies that are on the senior citizens board, and they worked in the courthouse when I was growing up. And one day they were talking about how it was so fun seeing me be in the courthouse now, and they got like there was tears shed between the 2, and I felt bad, but it was kind of touching at the same time, because they would leave out a hard candy bowl, and at the time I would just run in, and I was short then as a child. That changed later. But they would say they would just see my hand come over the counter and grab a piece of hard candy and just run off. So they were just, and then there's other people that have had those. But there was one time when I was a kid, and I've told this story publicly, that I thought I burnt down the courthouse. My grandma and grandpa lived across the road, and then my dad and my family moved in later after they moved. But my grandma did everything in her power to spoil every one of her grandsons, and had gotten me some fairly large bottle rockets. So the 80s in Miller County, I'm surprised a lot of us survived. It's just everything. I mean, 4-wheelers, 3-wheelers, guns, fireworks, everything. But so, I'm like 8 years old, standing outside with these bottle rockets and a cigarette lighter, and there was a like half circle window at the top of the courthouse, and one of the little panes was broken out. So for like a year, I was trying to lob bottle rockets into that little crack. Again, I was 8, maybe 9. So, and one day the stars aligned and one went in there and it popped and the entire top of the courthouse lit up white. I ran inside and went to bed because I thought I just burned down the courthouse. So I woke up the next morning and like peeked through the blinds and it was still there. And I was like, oh, thank God. But yes, that was a good one.
It's probably a good one to end on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I promise I will not burn down the current Miller County courthouse either. So we're safe.
Be sure to include that in the recording so all Miller Countyans can hear it.
This is the last episode of season 2. It also, I think, marks our 86th episode, which is crazy to think about. We're working on developing a season 3. I think we're still excited to keep talking to people and have conversations about what we expect to have happen in 2024 and what everybody's doing. But we've also talked some about, like how Eric said in the beginning, getting back to the roots of the podcast of a for us, by us, and focusing more on what's happening in local election offices, the challenges that local election authorities are facing, but also just kind of best practices and things that maybe we can just adopt from each other. As we're looking at 2024, we're all going to have to be more efficient. We're all going to have to find ways to better demonstrate to the public everything that we're doing. And there's still, I think, a lot of counties that don't quite know where to turn or have the resources to be able to create public information campaigns, or, they're just starting out and trying. As Clinton mentioned in his interview in this episode, he tried to go out and do public information sessions, which is great. And it's probably the first time that something like that had been tried in Miller County. And only a couple people showed up to that. And we're all kind of facing that, but we're all still planning to do more of it in 2024. So hopefully conversations like that with other local election officials will be fruitful. And, if anybody has any suggestions of who they want us to talk to, we are more than happy to talk to anybody.
Yeah. I don't know that I have anything to add, really. That's perfect.
You've been listening to High Turnout, Wide Margins, a podcast that explores local election administration. I'm your host, Brianna Lennon, alongside Eric Fay. Thanks to KBAA for making this podcast possible. Our managing editor is Rebecca Smith. Our managing producer is Aaron Hay, and our associate producers are Abigail Ruman and Katie Quinn. This has been High Turnout, Wide Margins. Thanks for listening.